And when I ate no eggs at all, it went up to 220. So even the concept that eating cholesterol contributes to your cholesterol reading is, you know, not necessarily true. Yeah. So, you know, I remember one of the first, you know, conversations I had that really scandalized my father, who at the time was a cardiologist. And at the Christmas dinner table, when I came back from college, I said that basically dietary cholesterol has almost nothing to do with heart disease. And he just went. But 10 years later, he came up to me and said, "You're right."
There is a genetic subpopulation of whom that's not true.
That's right. Yeah, and there's still other aspects of, you know, cholesterol oxide, peroxidation of cholesterol as a risk factor, and all kinds of other things. But there is a value for cholesterol, and if you look at total mortality, you know, the cholesterol curve is shaped like this. It's steep on both sides, high and low.
Yeah,
It's
And I have
steeper
something
low,
else
though.
to say.
okay. Yeah,
I just missed the, thanks. I just missed what testing should be done for hyperparathyroidism. I have a friend who's ill with osteoporosis and scleroderma and connective muscle stuff, and what should she be tested for hyperparathyroidism, or what should be tested?
We'll have Mike.
Hyperparathyroidism can
Mike, get it.
hyperparathyroidism, which is what he's talking about. You need to look kind of as it were, the yin and the yang of that, both the parathyroid as well as the calcitonin and vitamin D levels. Those are all interactive, but those are straightforward tests. And there are relationships between hyperparathyroidism and some autoimmune and inflammatory diseases, but I certainly wouldn't want to assert, I don't think he is either, that that's known to cause scleroderma, etc. A statistically more likely cause of osteoporosis and associated with scleroderma, and we were talking about this earlier, is gluten disease, or what's known as celiac disease. Celiac disease is linked with a whole range of autoimmune diseases and osteoporosis that occurs in some populations, 1 out of 80. So it's a more likely thing to think of. Since celiac disease is an autoimmune response to gliadin, part of the molecular substructure of gluten, it is an autoimmune disease. It's not a disease formally, but nevertheless it is associated with another range of autoimmune diseases like scleroderma. So that, I mean, you would think of that, for example, but quite frankly, and you know this, it's a far too complicated problem to answer here.
Yeah. And let me just add that gluten is a molecule found in substantial amounts in wheat.
Yeah.
So that 1 in 8 people basically are sensitive to wheat and really shouldn't probably eat it because it has all kinds of problems associated with it. And a lot of people who have think they have irritable bowel syndrome and who have other problems really are just gluten sensitive. And as soon as they cut out the gluten for 3 or 4 days, get it out of their system.
10 days.
10 days.
Sometimes takes a long time.
Yeah. Then they're back to being pretty much a normal person again. Now let's see. Yes.
Another thing you might look at is heavy metals, because that'll set off the immune system like crazy. And with scleroderma, I've seen good results treating for heavy metals.
Great.
Oh, and on gluten.
Okay, you want to say something about glutathione?
Oh, even with 3 days off of gluten, and then you go back on it, people will notice the difference. And when they go back on it, they'll say, "Oh, yeah, I noticed the difference already." So then they realize it's almost a test. They can say, "I don't feel good with it at all after the 3 days that they've avoided all gluten."
They genetically are in the same subgroup.
Yeah, in other words, even though all your symptoms might not go away, you can feel the difference just with 3 days off.
Another aspect of delayed hypersensitivity reactions, which wheat would be one of them, it could be milk or yeast or all kinds of other things that are hot on that list, is that the strength of the exposure is often inversely proportional to the strength of your symptoms. And so if you are allergic to wheat and you reintroduce it to your diet by eating an entire sandwich, the adverse reaction you have tends to be relatively mild, but spread out over a long period of time, and it may make it difficult to observe. But if you go through a complete washout, and you go 6 to 8 days, and you clear it all out of your system, and then you introduce not a sandwich, but a pea-sized piece of bread, you hyperreact, and it happens in hours, and then you tend to be back to normal the next day. And so it's often better to go through that process because it's so graphic. It can change your life. It can change your habits. And that's really the problem with getting off of wheat, is that you have to be, very, very dedicated. Wheat is everywhere.
Where you take it, it's a little bit like hysteresis if you think of it as a problem of physics.
A couple of comments. In terms of cholesterol, it's now known that forcing cholesterol below 150 predisposes toward Parkinson's disease. The whole business with cholesterol is a bag of snakes. In terms of the hyperparathyroid question, one needs to know not only the levels of calcium in the blood, but the regulation systems for calcium in the blood are very different from calcium in the cells. So it would be nice to know what the levels of various ions, calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, etc., in the cells are, which can be done by scraping of the tongue and sending the stuff off to the lab. Tim Guilford has tests for that, for example.
And by the way, I should just kind of introduce some of these people. That was Ed Garland, who's retired from SLAC, used to be one of the leading physicists over there and much published, and now an extremely valuable member of our group who's studying calcification of soft tissues and working on that. Before he spoke, Effie Mae Buckley spoke, who has her own clinic in San Jose, does a marvelous job for people who have, for example, gluten sensitivity. And so, I mean, and then Steve Fox is our main man, and he has been for 15 years from the very beginning. He's our resident biochemist and science advisor, and we have decided to import him at considerable expense now that he lives in Walnut Creek every month, so that he can do what he's always done. So thank you, Steve, for accepting that job here. Let me give it to you, then I'll go back to it.
One additional comment about that cellular electrolyte assessment. I have now had 2 of my clients almost killed by the medical profession by not monitoring their cellular electrolytes. And these people had what I describe as a potassium overutilization problem, a metabolic imbalance that causes their cells to accumulate potassium, which artificially lowers their serum potassium reading. And so the cardiologist would do the blood test and see their serum potassium is really low and start to give them potassium to correct that. And where they already had too much potassium, it drove one of them into a heart attack, and the other one now has arrhythmias as a result of this. And the second time it happened, first time it happened because the client was being treated for kidney stones. And so the doctor was trying to alkalinize the urine and change the urine parameters. But this time it was because the doctor prescribed the potassium. The patient was on an IV drip and put the potassium into the drip without consulting either the patient or his spouse. And even when they were told not to do it, continued to do it. Okay, and so this kind of thing, that the doctor knows better what's good for you, even when they kill you, that is somehow better for you than you know, is something that you really have to understand to survive the medical system, so that you're not victimized by something that the doctor doesn't know, and doesn't do a $100 test because somebody trained them years ago to say, okay, all you need to know is the serum potassium is an accurate indicator of your potassium electrolyte status, when it really is not.
If you may.
The lab it's the only lab in the United States that does a test where you're looking at cellular electrolytes is Intracellular Diagnostics in Medford, Oregon. And it's a really simple test. It's Medicare approved, and anytime there's a question about electrolytes, especially with cardiovascular problems and checking magnesium, it's a really good test.
I know a cheaper one.
Do you? Is it as good as Bert's?
Okay, here's Mr. Vitamin D, Bill Grant himself.
Just want to make a brief announcement. I spent this morning in Oakland at a workshop in the black community on asthma. And we had Dr. Michael Lenore, who has a program on KPFA on Mondays at 2 p.m. It's a one-hour program called About Health. And I heard his announcement of the program, so I went to it and, of course, raised the vitamin D issue. And they hadn't heard of it in the asthma community. But it turns out there's a lot of evidence that vitamin D does relate to asthma. I think it's probably through reducing the risk of getting a viral infection, which could lead to asthma, and also getting infections that might exacerbate it. It turns out in California, asthma attacks are 50% more common in winter than they are in summer, which goes along with the seasonality of vitamin D from sunlight. Anyway, I'm working on a couple of other projects. One is Alzheimer's disease is likely linked to low vitamin D. And it turns out in the news, you may have seen this week, that pandemic influenza, you don't die of the virus, you die of the pneumonia, the bacteria that are already in your system. Well, I got some data from 1919 and from 12 cities throughout the country and showed that the case fatality rate was inversely correlated with the amount of solar UVB in the various cities. So we're working that manuscript up to send to the same journal. I mean, here's Fauci, Anthony Fauci, head of infectious diseases, and I even gave him the book Solar Power when he was at the Commonwealth Club, but he hasn't read it, and they're not going to try to look into a simple way to fight the next pandemic. But anyway, the announcement I want to make is that I will be on Michael Lenore's program on September 8th at 2 p.m. That's KPFA, that's 94.1 FM. So you can listen, you can learn my latest findings and call in questions and about vitamin D.
Okay, Bill has published about 30 or 40 articles just on the subject of vitamin D, not counting his other articles. And so that's why I call them Mr. Vitamin D's. Some of the articles really got the country turned around, the research community turned around. Of course, it wasn't single-handed, but there's a very small group to start with, right, Bill? Maybe 3 or 4 people. And now, of course, we have this tremendous focus on vitamin D, thank God, because, it's going to change the health of the country. Let's see, who had their hand? Oh, Jim. Yeah, Jim.
As a little aside, I was going to mention that this month you get 2 for the price of 1. Okay. One of the longest-winded speakers in our entire group, Phil Jacklin, thank you very much. I think second might be Bernd Friedlander. Third in ranking might be Don Southard. I'm not sure, Don. You're good at it. I'm sure you're all good at it. Okay, good. So if you weren't here last month, it was Phil talking about low-cost lifesavers, making it to 100. Fabulous presentation. We didn't even have time to go through all the slides. And then Phil Miller did a great thing on vitamin D and such. And so I've got 2 taped together here for $15 if you want one at the break.
I want one.
And there you go. So,
okay,
good.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, I tell you what, I'm getting carried away here. We've got to stop and bring on Don Southard to introduce our short report. So,
Hey, Phil.
yes, sir.
I'm Jim. Hi. Nice to meet you.
I'm a newcomer here, but I understand that we're pretty much in the same group. We have white hair and white beards. I'll just share an experience with you. About 20 years ago, my surgeon, who worked on my colon cancer after surgery, told me that I had a 10% chance to live 5 years. And I kept thinking, what did I do to last? And what I did then was building awareness. What I ate, stress, sleep, the foods that gave me energy, the foods that didn't give me energy. And I found that it's pretty simple. I don't have a lot of information to give you why that works, the different systems in the body. But I do a lot of yoga now. That's in the last 5 years. My best life experience is a building process, and I just want to tell you that I do things simply, I guess. retired high school teacher.
Okay, Lee Black, and retired high school teacher, and now quite a distinguished yoga teacher in Saratoga.
Can you read it?
And I've heard of him before.
My handwriting's
So thank you for coming, Lee. Okay, now let's see.
Yes.
Where's Dan? Here we go.
here.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Prove us wrong.
Oh,
You know, the world is crying out for straight men, and all we get are comedians. I just want to mention one thing. Like a lot of you people, perhaps, I got hooked into something on the internet here a few months ago. It said, please rejoin your old classmates from 1939 to 1943. Now, in 1943, all of us that got out of school immediately went in 600 different directions, Pacific, Europe, I don't know where in God's name they all went, but rarely did we ever get to see anybody after that. But one of the first emails I got was from a girl that I had a crush on in high school, but I never told her, I never said a word to her. Her name was Patty Packett, and that's the first message I got. And I said, my God, this is thrilling. So I signed up for 2 years, and all of a sudden I realized, you know, most of those people don't even exist any longer, and beautiful young Patty has to be 82 or 83 years old now. Now, coincidentally, the same day I received on the internet, you may enjoy this, it said, have you ever been guilty of looking at others your own age? Surely I can't look that old. You'll love this one. My name is Alice Smith, and I was sitting in the waiting room for my first appointment with a new dentist. I noticed his DDS diploma, which bore his full name. Suddenly I remembered a tall, handsome, dark young boy with the same name had been in my high school class some 40 years ago. Could it be the same guy that I had a secret crush on then? Upon seeing him, however, I quickly discarded any such thought. This balding, gray-haired man with a deeply lined face was too old to have been my classmate. After he examined my teeth, I asked him if he had attended Morgan Park High School. Yes, I did. I'm a Mustang, he said proudly. When did you graduate, I asked. He answered, 1959. Why do you ask? You were in my class, I exclaimed. He looked at me closely, then that ugly, old, bald-headed, wrinkled, fat-ass, gray-haired, decrepit son of a bitch asked, what did you teach? Basically, thinking of some of these things, a year or so ago, we had a wonderful organization on the Monterey Peninsula, formed in the Monterey Peninsula, and they talked to us last year, and as you remember, our wonderful doctor that came in from Biobank, who was a member of the Pasteur Institute and the University of Paris, world-famous individual. They took our blood, they store our blood. I talked to Roberta Carlson, and every time somebody comes in, I said, Roberta, they took my blood, they store it until you get some sick illness, some bad illness, and then they inject it back into your body. When your immune system is strong, when you get weak, then they put it back into the body. And so perpetually, I'm still thinking of myself as the man that played the role of handsome, dashing young Tony Bennison on Broadway, and that's really not the case any longer. But we have a wonderful lady here today who is a member of our group and has been here, Roberta Carlson. So Roberta, would you come up? She's going to tell us about what do you call it, Roberta? Cord cell?
Cord blood.
Cord blood.
Cord blood stream.
Yes. And she's a great spokesman. And every month she moves my blood next to all of the new beautiful women that come into the system. Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you. It's a wonderful warm-up and hard to follow. Now, as I look out into the group tonight, I see a lot of potential fathers and fewer potential mothers, but a lot of grandmothers potentially and grandfathers both. And what I'm talking about tonight is something that could be left as a legacy to your children and to your grandchildren. And that's cord blood banking. I don't know if, I'm sure many of you have heard about it. Some of you are probably more expert at it than I am. But it's something that has been really brought into the public awareness in the last couple of years. The first cord blood was banked 18 years ago by a scientist in California who believed that there were 3 life-threatening diseases in babies and children that could be reversed by using cord blood. 1988 was the first year that there was actually cord blood infusion into a baby that had Fanconi's anemia, done at the hospital where Dr. Sharon is in Paris at the Hospital St. Louis. And that child is now a father and has a family, and that baby would have died without that. But that was the very first cord blood stem cell transplant done in the world. There have subsequently been thousands that have been done, either on the child whose blood has been collected, or cord blood stem cells have been collected, or on a sibling, can even be grandparents or mother, father, depending on the HLA matching. Let's see if I can figure out how to use this.
Hit F5 on the computer.
Okay. Which were required classes.
Now push the button.
Steve, do you know how to make this work?
There we go. There we go. All right. Cord blood is the blood that remains in a baby's umbilical cord after birth. It's rich in stem cells, and it has the potential to be used in life-saving medical procedures. There are actually over 70 diseases today that cord blood stem cells are used to treat, to either modify the symptoms or to totally reverse. Stem cells are the component of blood that is preserved for the future use by cord blood banking. I'm not sure where to point this. There we go. Stem cells can be considered the master's cells of the body. They give rise to all the, can everybody hear me? They give rise to all the tissues, organs, and systems in the body, and they take the place of cells that die. I'd be more comfortable if I can just speak, if everybody can hear me clearly.
Yes.
Let me know if you can't, please. As I said, cord blood stem cells are currently used to treat over 70 different diseases, including leukemia and other cancers of the blood, immune disorders, and blood disorders. The future options, there are clinical trials going on now where they're trying to regenerate cells in the spinal cord and in the brain and in different organs of the body. I find it remarkable. I don't know if anybody saw the Today Show recently. They interviewed a young couple. They had decided just 2 weeks before the birth of their baby to store the stem cells. They heard about it, decided, well, why don't we do it? And so they stored them. The baby was born with cerebral palsy. Of course, that's something that you don't know in advance. There's no genetic component to it. Something had happened while the mother was carrying the baby, whether she had a fever or they didn't know what had caused it. But at 7 months of age, they knew that there was definitely a problem. The child could not crawl, wasn't pulling himself up at all, never ever laughed or smiled, couldn't articulate, couldn't swallow properly. And they said to the doctors, when the baby was diagnosed with CP, they said to the doctors, well, we stored the stem cells, can we use them for this particular illness or disease? And the doctor said, no, it's never been used for that. At 9 months, the baby was still not making any progress at all. And they said to the doctors, can't you try using the stem cells? And the doctors finally consented, even though it had not been done. Now, this is February of this year. And this was in Sacramento. And that baby, 2 weeks after being given its own stem cells back from the umbilical cord blood, something that is normally thrown away, was running, was saying daddy and mama, which it had never articulated words at all. And his father said the most wonderful thing of all is hearing the baby laugh. And then just this week, this past week, they had a follow-up. And I did not see that, and I really wanted to splice them together and show it as part of the presentation, but wasn't able to pull that together today when I was told about it. But it showed how much progress that child has made in these months that have passed since February when the stem cell transplant was first done. So it continues to make improvement. There was another baby that was in the news and on the news recently, and Fox News, I believe it was, and this baby also had CP, and because of this initial success that they had in Sacramento, this baby was born with one side of its brain was missing, and it was filled with cerebral fluid. And they had saved the cord blood of this particular baby, and they infused it into the baby. And that baby, who was not able to use one side of its body at all, after they infused the cord blood, was able to sign with both hands. So the baby will never be a fully functioning child as a normal child, but it has made progress, and it will be interesting to see what the continuing progress is over the months to come. But when I talk about future options, it really seems unlimited when you think that in other countries they're actually using these stem cells to treat people, older individuals that have heart issues, liver issues. That is, in fact, recently they were doing trials and had remarkable success. This is still in the mouse stage, but with regenerating liver tissue. And in the United States, it is the third leading cause of death, liver disease. And the incidence of hepatitis is growing rapidly year by year, contagious hepatitis. Again, as I mentioned, there's a potential use for siblings, parents, or even grandparents, depending on the HLA matching. There have been no adverse effects ever reported as a result of cord blood collection. In some hospitals, different hospitals do it differently. Sometimes they wait until the placenta has come out. Sometimes the placenta is still in the body when they clamp off the umbilical cord and take the blood. 50 ml to 80 ml is the amount of blood that is taken. It's very small. I have a cassette that I meant to show you. It's in bag and back, but it's what if you think of the old-fashioned cassettes that you put in a car radio to listen to music before we had CDs, that's the size of the cassette that holds the actual cord blood that's stored, the stem cells from the cord blood. There's absolutely no risk to the mother or the baby. Sorry. There are two types of cord blood banks in the United States. Some countries have only public banks. They don't allow private banking at all. In the United States, there's an option between private banking and public banking, and I'll just go quickly into the differences. With a private bank, you store your baby's or your grandchild. The baby's cord blood is stored, and it is the property of the parents until the child turns 18 years of age. So those cells remain in the bank for use for that baby or that family, and the family determines the use of those cord cells. I must say there are maybe 3 to 4% of all births store their cord blood. The rest is all disposed of. So we have a long way to go. In public banking, somebody donates their cord blood to a public bank, and that can be used for scientific research. It can be used by a person that needs a transplant. They find that the transplant from cord blood is an easier match than with a bone marrow transplant. It takes hold more quickly and is far more easily accessible. Just a little about the collection process. Shortly after the delivery of the baby, the umbilical cord is collected. In our particular case, we do it by syringe, and it is transferred into a pouch that is a sterile pouch, and it goes into a insulated container. We've had people from other countries that have requested that we store their cord blood, but there are cord blood companies in almost every country of the world. It's quickly taken hold in other countries particularly. So I generally recommend to people who are calling from overseas that they store locally, just because of the travel component. Now, there are a lot of foreign people who have contacted us who live here in the United States. It is a much simpler process to send the cord blood anywhere in the world. We have a cryogenic shipper that's about this big around and about this high, and it holds this little cassette, and it can keep it at a minus 130 degrees for 2 weeks. So, whereas if something is shipped to us and it gets delayed or it misses a flight somewhere, there's only 48 hours between the time of collection and the time that it needs to be processed. So the time is more critical in the collection than in shipping out afterwards. There is blood samples are taken from the mother for infectious diseases. We have a couple of times had to refuse the cord blood because the mothers have had hepatitis. So if they are contagious in any way, we do not collect the cells. They go in a tank. There is no, it would appear that there's no way that it can transfer from one sample to another, but for safety purposes, we prefer to remain on the safe side by not storing it. Once completed, the parent will pack up the kit. The company who is collecting or who is storing the blood will send a courier. It goes into the laboratory and begins its process of storing. Cord Bank USA, for whom I work, and I don't mean this as much as an advertisement as I want just to inform you of what's available. We have 2 of the best pieces of equipment, partly because we're a new company. We use the AXP machine for the separating process. Most of the companies are still doing it manually. So with the AXP machine, it's very fine-tuned. It can take out the majority of the white blood cells, and it can deal with a very, very small amount of blood. Whereas with the hand method of separation, you have to have a higher volume of blood. A cryoprotectant is added to the cells so that they can be safely frozen. They're packed into double packed in a plastic wrap, put in the cassette, go through a slow freeze process in a separated container within the tank itself, and then after they reach their temperature about minus 196 degrees Celsius, there is a robotic arm that takes them to their barcoded address. With many other companies, an earlier process that is used is called a doer system. If you think of an old-fashioned freezer where you lift up the door of the freezer, you want some ice cubes, you take out a tray, you take out the particular ice cube you want and put it back again, and at the same time you're exposing the contents of the freezer and the tray to the ambient warming temperature of the room. With our bioarchive, which you see pictured on the bottom, the robotic arm goes into an area that is totally separate. You're only dealing with one cassette at a time, and there's no risk of exposure to any other cassettes as they're freezing. Stem cells have proven viable after 15 years of storage. Scientists believe that there is no end date, that they would outlive the individual whose stem cells have been stored. Because when you take them out there at 15 years, they were 100% of what they were put in at, the viability of the cells that were frozen. A certificate is sent out when they're stored. If they're ever needed, a call is made to the company that's storing. Again, the AXP machine and the bioarchive that I showed before are the highest tech pieces of equipment used in the industry. They were designed by Thermogenesis in conjunction with the New York Blood Bank, one of the premier blood banks in the United States. They had been storing for years, and they knew exactly what they wanted in a machine, and Thermogenesis worked with them to create these 2 systems of storage and processing. Back up? I have no idea how to back up. Any suggestions from what was it that you had a question about?
Your security and your security precautions and safety precautions.
Oh, okay. Well, and regarding the cryo preservation tank that's used, it does not require any electricity to be used. So there can be a power outage that can go on for days, and the cryo preservation tank will continue to cool at a steady rate and maintain the temperature of a minus 196 degrees because it is attached to a liquid nitrogen tank. And that feeds automatically into the tank, so it doesn't use electricity. There are overrides. It is connected to a computer, which of course uses electricity, but there's an override system so that samples can be put in and taken out and go to the appropriate barcoded addresses. Don?
Roberta, if you have a child's stem cells and their siblings, one of their siblings gets sick or one of the parents gets sick, does it have any value for any of those others in the family?
Yes, it has potential use for family members, depending on the HLA matching, which is a lot easier to match, A, because it's a family member, and B, because it's not bone marrow. It's more immature than bone marrow. So the body doesn't reject it as quickly as it does bone marrow.
So if a child were born today, that blood could help a child that was born 2, 3, 4 years ago when this was not available.
Not available. Well, it was available, but people
Yeah,
didn't know about it. But yes, that is correct. It is more often used for a sibling than it is for the actual baby. And it is not unknown today for a couple to get pregnant because they have a child who has a life-threatening illness in the hopes that that baby's cord blood will save their child. So you asked about security. We have 24-hour security. It's monitored, double alarmed, and we use systems that can't be overridden. Yes, sir.
When you talk about storing things for 15 years or indefinitely, one of the problems that NASA has had is that no computer operating system normally lasts as viable for 15 years. Computers change, operating systems change. And the storage media for computers are quite fragile on the time scale of 10 or 15 years. How do you deal with that? How do you back up? How do you change operating systems? Or have you not yet thought about that?
Oh, absolutely. It's thought of both by us and by the company that sold us the equipment. They're always looking at, every computer company is trying to create new databases or new systems, updated systems. We do have a paper system. It isn't all just computerized. All of our codes are in files on all paperwork for each individual, and we have scanners that can read those files to find, are you talking about for taking it out or putting it in, or just an overall operating system long term?
Overall operating.
Yeah. Yeah, there are safeguards in place.
And retrieval case of crashes.
Right, and that's what I was saying, we can key in manually to operate it without electricity. Yes, sir.
The case study you talked about of the cerebral palsy boy, what mystery to me is, how does it introduce to the child, and how does the body know
Where to put it? It is a miracle.
Oh, don't.
The infusion is very easy.
Just put it in the bloodstream?
You just inject it in the body. Very, very easy.
Miraculous.
It is miraculous. That's exactly how we refer to it. Yes.
Is there any possibility down the road, 5 years from now, that this would be like blood doping for runners, where let's say somebody had MS and they did not have an attack at that time, they would put their blood away, and then when an attack came along, it might be used to mitigate the attack?
Well, I wouldn't consider that doping.
Well, no.
I hear what you're saying. It's not a, yeah. I can't.
Good idea.
Yeah, but no, I think that is it's an idea. We think of it in terms of the white blood cells. You talked earlier about a flu pandemic and ending up dying of pneumonia or some bacterial infection in the body, and the demise of the immune system through the attack of the flu. And we think of the white blood cells as doing just that as well, increasing the ability of the body to fight whatever it's trying to fight.
Myeloma as well.
Correct.
Now stem cells, when you have a stem cell injection, then it changes your blood type to that donor's stem cell.
It can. In fact, I read an article about a gentleman who had, this is another thing, and I'll be very quick because I know that you have your next speaker to come up. In the time that I have been working in this company, when I started researching the cord blood, seeing that that was what we were going to be doing because we had the pieces of equipment that were optimally used for that purpose, there were 40 diseases that could be treated, and now there are 70 plus, and that's in just over a year. Lost my train of thought. You asked me a question.
About the blood type changing from the...
When I started, they could not identify the cells that were needed for this. So you have a very small sample that would only be enough for a child or a baby, maybe a child up to 90 pounds. And then if they needed more, if they became ill and needed more than that amount, they had to get it from a public bank. Now at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Institute in Washington, there's a Dr. Delaney, whom I spoke to on the telephone. I was doing research on the internet, and it said that she was in trials using multiplied stem cells from cord blood. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. So I called her up and I said, how have the trials been going? She said, it has been remarkable. She said, our success has been far greater than we ever expected. So the limitation that was on cord blood initially, when I have to talk to parents because the amount of cord blood is maybe below the amount that we would like to have, now I can tell them there is now the opportunity of multiplying those cells. You can do it with adult white blood cells, but you couldn't do it with cord blood until just recently. I believe Duke, a university in North Carolina, is also having success with the multiplication of the cells. And I can't get into the technicalities, but if I speak here again, I'll know that information.
I'll tell you what, this is such a great report. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
But let's take 2 more questions and just go a little longer. I think this lady first, and then
I just want to say I'm friends with a young Navajo, a 13-year-old boy who came down with acute onset leukemia from exposure to uranium tailings in New Mexico. And stem cells from cord blood saved his life, and just through a matching from the bank, no family member or anything, saved his life.
He was very fortunate because one of the problems they're having with public banks is not having enough minority participants in the program. Oftentimes there's a cultural taboo about giving away a blood product or using a blood product. So
I don't think the donor was Native American. I mean, he had to go through all the immunosuppressant stuff.
yes, he would have had to have done that.
survived.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Great report. Thank you.
hey, Anna, that's good.
4 years ago, the cost was extremely high, and I'm wondering if it has come down the cost.
Well, because we were in the business of storing the white blood cells, and because we had the equipment, and the owner's son's wife got pregnant, and he was researching storing the cord blood, and we weren't going to be operational in time, he was appalled at the price, knowing what it actually cost the company that's doing it. And he was determined that when we came onto the market that we were going to price reasonably so more families could do it. The price at the time for most companies was around $2,000. Ours is $995.
That is for a lifetime or per year?
Oh, no, sorry. That is for the collection, the shipment of the kit itself, the return by courier to us, the laboratory processing, placement in the storage tank, and the first year of storage. After that, there is a storage charge of $12.50 a month, $150 a year, which is pretty reasonable. Less than our cable television companies. Yes?
Great, thanks very much.
You're most welcome.
That was quality work, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out, for anybody interested in learning more about it, that very first Parent's Guide to Cord Blood was written by a scientist, a female scientist whose daughter at 4 years of age was diagnosed with leukemia. They asked her if she had the baby stem cells. She didn't know about it. Her baby died. She was so upset that she wrote this website, and it is the best website that I have seen on the internet. Very, very thorough, and if you want to learn more about it, that's a great one to go to. I highly recommend it.
And your pamphlets are in back.
I have, yes, and I have handouts in the back if anybody is further interested.
Okay.
All right.
And thanks, Don, for bringing Roberta to us. Another great contribution. By the way, Don, I just want to know, did I understand you to say when you were introducing Roberta that you were the leading man presenting Tony Bennett? Do you have a background in musical theater, yes or no?
Yes.
We see that great voice that we've been hearing, right? It's got to, now it comes out, you see. These old guys have a history. Okay, well now, one announcement, then we'll take our break. We are going to go back to Coverly. And, it's a long story. The board was divided over it. This has been a wonderful place to meet. It's expensive. Did I see Mike Corrick anywhere? Okay, I guess he thought he might make it. Never mind. I just for a second, I didn't want to neglect to say hello if he made it. But anyway, back to the announcement. So we're going back to Coverly. We'll be there in September, 3rd Thursday. You all know how to find it. Same room, H1. Now, I'm going to try to do two things at once. I'm going to pass out cards. On the back it says Coverly. Now, I want you to keep this until you make it to the meeting, so you remember that it's Coverly and not here. And then I want you to give the card away to the first person that talks about some health issue with you, so we can do some recruitment. Okay? So, okay, I'm going to give. Let's see, Laura. Laura, would you pass out? Whoopsie. Thanks. Would you pass out on this side? And would you mind passing out on this side? Thanks very much. Okay, now one other thing, it's a very nice thing. We now have the help of Laura Corcoran's husband, John Corcoran, as our database manager. And I was hoping he'd be here. I don't think he's not here, is he, Laura? No. But anyway, I wanted to make that announcement. He's going to be one of our regular, listed volunteers. And we're very grateful for that. Okay, we'll take a break, and we'll come back at 20 after.
Yeah, if anybody's interested in this electric car rally, 6th of September, that's a Saturday, and it's at Palo Alto High School and Embarcadero in El Camino. And it's from 10 to 4. And I have an electric car out there tonight, and I've had it since the early 80s. And so anybody interested, it's our 36th year, by the way. Anyway.
Terrific. Okay, that's a great opportunity. I mean, there's very few subjects that are as interesting as electric cars these days. So I hope you all remember that. September 6th, say hello to this gentleman. He's one of our regulars, and I want to look at that car, so please don't go home too soon. Okay, we'll take a break now, and we'll come back in 15